The librarian left little to chance, didn't she? Turning my own guardians, my own world, against me. But what hubris to believe she could protect her pets from me forever.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and before I get started here I just wanted to let you guys know that I've started a second channel called Multiverse, where I will give other universes the same treatment I've given the Halo universe. So if you want to get to know Deus Ex, Crisis, Mass Effect, Doom, Anthem and others in as deep a way as we have here, pop over to Multiverse and subscribe. We kick things off this week, link is in the description. Today, however, we take a look at the Ur-Didact and investigate his abilities, his physical form and his personality, and discover some of the more innate complexities of a being who has existed with great burden for eons. The Ur-Didact, born Shadow of Sundered Star, is a Forerunner Promethean who held an extremely high status in the Forerunner society as a protector of the Ecumene, head of the Warrior Servant Rate and supreme commander of the entire Forerunner military. He wholeheartedly believed in the mantle the Forerunners held to protect life, and fervently opposed the Halo array as a sin beyond measure. He was also the lover and husband of the librarian. Originally thought to be killed by the master builder Faber, the Ur-Didact effectively existed as two individuals during the final days of the Forerunner Flood War, his original self as well as his implanted consciousness within a young Forerunner known as Born Stellar makes eternal lasting. To differentiate these two incarnations, the original Ur-Didact was referred to as the Ur-Didact, while his other incarnation was known as the Iso-Didact. The Ur-Didact was eventually exiled on Requiem, not to be awakened until 2557, meanwhile the Iso-Didact served until the final days of the Flood conflict and was responsible for activating the Halo array. As an immensely powerful Forerunner with incredibly advanced technologies at his disposal, the Ur-Didact has a number of extraordinary abilities. He has the capability to generate and manipulate powerful constraint fields at will, in effect granting him the power of telekinesis to restrain or physically harm his opponents from a distance. This was demonstrated when he used this ability on John 117, immobilizing him and causing him to float helplessly in the air, before throwing him against a wall. Later, during the final confrontation aboard Mantle's approach, he used this ability to physically torture the Spartan, who was only saved by Cortana's intervention. He can also use the fields to levitate himself to some extent. Several times the Ur-Didact was able to address John 117 telepathically, though Cortana failed to hear anything or pick up any transmissions. The Ur-Didact was also capable of generating a shockwave by stomping on the ground. While at the Composer's Forge, the Ur-Didact used this ability to cause Spartan 2 Blue Team to stumble to the ground. Later, during his battle against the Spartans, he generated a powerful linear energy blast to disable Kelly 087. The Ur-Didact possesses extraordinary neurological, mental and physical abilities bestowed by his senior Promethean form. One of these is the augmented state of perception known as Battle Mode, splintering his perception of reality into several variable frames of reference with a slowed down experience of time, granting him impressive multitasking capabilities. In hand-to-hand combat, he was capable of matching Spartan 2 reaction times, and was able to easily slaughter a fire team of them without weapons. Wearing his armour, he was capable of crushing a Z-180 scattershot in his hand and severely damaging John 117's helmet, as well as throwing the Mjolnir armoured Master Chief several metres through the air with force significant enough to knock other Spartans to the ground. The Ur-Didact adhered to the long-standing warrior tradition of sharing all knowledge with his command staff of dozens as well as their ancillas. Indeed, he remarked that he was out of his element when working alone, preferring to have an expert crew with him at all times when leading operations. During large-scale engagements, the Ur-Didact would also tap into the sensory input of thousands of his fellow Prometheans simultaneously and experience the battle from their respective viewpoints, in addition to his own. His memory is also incredibly accurate. While stranded on the Builder Hulk in the Burn, he was capable of reciting a verbal control code comprising 400 random nonsense words and non-integral numbers after thousands of years and without the aid of an ancilla. After undergoing an experimental mutation in an attempt to become immune to the Flood, the Ur-Didact gained a new form that, while still susceptible to the Flood infection, was no longer compatible with the Composer, thereby preventing him from joining his fellow Prometheans as a machine, and allowing him to willingly levitate himself within a Composer's active beam without being affected at all. However, his incompatible physiology was not enough to save him from being composed by the simultaneous firing of several composers. Like Warrior Servant armor in general, the Didact's personal armor was designed to attune itself to enemy weaponry. This allowed his armor to become virtually invulnerable to numerous successive hits from Forerunner infantry weapons. The Didact can also manipulate the architecture of areas under his control, such as within Requiem or his ship. For example, he disintegrated a wall John 117 was taking cover behind, and later manipulated the platforms inside a tower on Requiem to hinder the Master Chief's progression. He has direct control over his Promethean armies, and was capable of returning them to his command with a mere gesture. A full-rate Promethean, the Didact is a physically imposing figure standing 350 centimeters tall. He easily towers over a fully armoured Spartan too. In comparison to other Forerunners, he stood nearly twice a Manipular's height and weighed 4 or 5 times as much. As was common with Forerunners of his rate, the Didact has 6-fingered hands with 2 opposable thumbs and heavily muscled limbs. Bornstiller makes Eternal Lasting believe that he could easily have crushed a human with his bare hands. In his original form, the Didact's skin was greyish pink in colour, and he had patches of bluish-white fur on the top of his head and shoulders, as was common with warrior servants. He had strong, serious facial features and deep-set grey eyes. The new form assumed by the Didact near the end of the Forerunner Flood War, caused by a failed attempt to decipher Flood immunity, had a more grotesque, bestial appearance with more pronounced facial features, much less prominent lips, and the addition of large fangs. His eyes also became more deep-set and red as opposed to the original greyish-blue, and his fur changed from pale blue to dark brown. The Didact's original body assist armour complied with Warrior Servant tradition in both design and coloration, bearing the mottled grey and blue colours of a Warrior Servant. The suit was, despite its wearer's lofty status, considered austere in contrast to more lavishly decorated armour worn by the builders. Circa 100,000 BCE, the Didact began wearing a new combat skin upon his return to Nom Dagro. The Didact continued to wear this until the suit's apparent destruction in 2557. In stark contrast to his prior armour, the Didact's newer suit is prominently ornamented in contrast to more subdued armour usually worn by his rate. It is composed of a number of silver armour sections with complex patterns of orange light. The bodysuit, which spontaneously adheres to the body, is coloured black and dark red, resulting in an appearance similar to exposed musculature. The Didact was a highly experienced and powerful warrior as a result of his millennia-long career as a Promethean. Before his corruption by the Gravemind, the Didact was a noble and sensible figure. He adhered strictly to warrior servant precepts and traditions and fiercely opposed anything that clashed with his ideals. This was the reason for his opposition to the Halo Array, as he viewed the weapons as an affront to everything the mantle stood for. He was a follower of the warrior servant's interpretation of the mantle, believing that defying the Forerunners was to show contempt for the mantle itself. While he believed that the mantle accepted everyone, even contemporary humanity who conquered other species, this did not change his condemnation of such actions or the strong resentment he felt towards humanity. Although he generally demonstrated a stoic and calm disposition, the Didact could also be quick to anger if provoked. After encountering the Gravemind, the Didact underwent a drastic shift in his personality. He became much less rational, his psyche distorting to the point of insanity. As part of his ploy to turn the Didact against his former allies, the Gravemind took advantage of his existing motivations, convictions, and prejudices, most notably his opposition to the Halos and antipathy towards humanity, making these characteristics significantly more pronounced. Developing a belief in absolute, unconditional Forerunner supremacy, he concluded that the early Forerunners' violence seizing the mantle from the precursors had been justified, and that the Forerunners should mercilessly eliminate any species who might challenge their dominance in the future. He began to desperately pursue brutal and unrealistic strategies, such as creating his army of Promethean Knights, an obsession which eventually drove him to composing Omega Halo's human population. The irrational cruelty of this act finally convinced the librarian to imprison him. While the Didact believed that his schemes would bring about a new age of primacy for the Forerunners, in actuality he was only working to the Flood's advantage by generating additional suffering and chaos. When first meeting with Bornsteller, the Didact viewed the Manipular as foolish and naive, cursing him for waking him from his hibernation. But over the course of their travels, he would begin to share some of the wisdom gained as a result of his experience, effectively becoming a mentor figure for the young Forerunner. This continued even after the two had been separated, with the Didact's imprint consciousness offering his views on various matters and making occasional weary comments to Bornsteller, until fully subsuming his consciousness in order to continue the original Didact's work as the Isodidact. By the time the two reunited years later, their relationship quickly became much less amicable, in particular due to the Isodidact's acceptance of the Halo Array as a final option. The 100,000 years the Didact spent locked away in meditative hibernation on Requiem did nothing to heal his damaged psyche or soften his grudge against humanity. Upon being reawakened by John 117, he remained as determined as ever to ensure Forerunner supremacy and resolved to compose the entire human race to finish what he started all those ages ago. However, his rage and overconfidence in his abilities led to his defeat at the hands of the Master Chief twice, the first time leading to his fall into a slipspace portal and the second leading to his physical body being destroyed by the Composers, the very device with which he had planned to enslave humanity. The Didact was considered in his time to be the supreme enemy of humans, viewing mankind as a grave threat to Forerunner peace and considering them to be extremely contentious, bigoted, and self-centered. However, in his own mind, this animosity was not driven by hatred or malice, rather it was a largely rational reaction to humanity's actions. After his encounter with the Gravemind, his attitudes became much more extreme, and he opted to wipe out humanity entirely as a potential threat to the Forerunner supremacy. This new stance, combined with a desperation to stop the Flood, was behind his heinous actions towards the end of the Forerunner Flood War. Prior to his transformation, while dismissive of the potential for humans to take on the mantle, the Didact also respected humans as warriors and regarded them as honourable, unlike their Sanshayum allies who had surrendered earlier in the war. In fact, he regarded them as the second greatest military power in the galaxy at that time. His respect for the humans was demonstrated when he met with his former opponent, Fourth Encho, the Lord of Admirals, in person after the humans' defeat, speaking to him as a fellow warrior and reassuring him about the future despite humanity's grim predicament. Furthermore, prior to him being imprisoned after his fall from grace in the Ecumene Council, he stated that had the humans repented for their crimes, they would have been a civilization worthy of joining their own. Though disgusted to see Chakas as he looked too much like the humans who had nearly destroyed his fleet and murdered his children, the Didact was pleased to see Riser, a Florian. The Didact commented that he had specifically requested that the librarian save the Florians because he saw them as peaceful yet full of cleverness. However, the Didact made it clear that this just made them worthy pets to him. The Didact also regarded John 117 with some grudging respect for his determination and persistence in fighting him against impossible odds. While he understood humanity's motives for aggressive expansion after studying their records of their struggle with the Flood, the Didact agreed with the Old Council's decision to eradicate the contemporary human civilization and banish the remnants of the species to their homeworld, as he felt that humans had wrongly taken the mantle upon themselves in the attempts to contain the Flood. The Didact also held that the Forerunners were more deserving of the mantle than humans because of the latter's propensity for finding objects of worship in nature and in precursor artifacts, whereas the Forerunners had always derived their beliefs solely from the mantle. The Didact's antipathy towards humans was at least partially curtailed by the librarian, who was, in stark contrast, regarded as humanity's greatest protector. Despite his love for her, the Didact was incapable of understanding his wife's protectiveness towards humanity, and resented her efforts to keep the humans safe from his justice and retribution. The Ur-Didact appeared to regard Chakas and Riser, the two humans who accompanied Bornsteller, with relative indifference, viewing them as mere annoyances, though he tolerated them because they were part of his wife's plan and because he likely recognised the value of their personality imprints. When Bornsteller became annoyed with the Didact's way of referring to the two as Bornsteller's humans, the Didact grudgingly adjusted his method of addressing them. However, he was less than pleased initially at Chakas' form, as it reminded him too much of the ancient humans who had cost the Didact so much, and stated that Chakas' presence provoked him as a result. After being released from his cryptum many millennia later, the Ur-Didact resumed his war against humanity. Spartan John 117 and Cortana fought him on his ship and sent him falling into slipspace, seemingly defeating him. After surviving Slipspace, John 117 faced him again, this time with the rest of Blue Team. After a long and perilous battle, the Ur-Didact's biological form was destroyed under the combined power of several composers. While he is considered contained by the Office of Naval Intelligence, his digital consciousness apparently survives. This, to me, was a rather unfitting way to conclude the Didact's more recent story. Not that I think that his story is concluded by any extent of the imagination. There are dozens of loose ends and unanswered questions that would more poetically conclude his story were they addressed in-game. The problem herein is that the complexities of the Didact and his story are difficult to articulate in an in-game setting that has dozens of characters relatively central to the narrative. I do, however, look forward to seeing the Didact return in future titles, both games and novels. That being said, although he has been somewhat absent from the lore since Halo Escalation and completely absent from the game since Halo 4, I and others agree that Infinite is not the time to bring him back into the fray. Don't get me wrong, I think the Didact is one of the more interesting, complex and fascinating characters of the Halo universe due to the complexities with how he sees the universe, the obvious corruption he is carrying, and yet his strength of will and mind to remain, at least in part, fairly well balanced psychologically speaking, while battling what is effectively a biological logic plague bestowed upon him by the Flood. This speaks to just how powerful of character the Didact is, but also how equally vulnerable he is to a threat as large as the Flood. I reference now an article by Haruspis. If you're not aware who he is, I've attached links in the description to his blog as well as a video here on YouTube, which is a self-composed narrative spoken with all of the articulate flair of the Didact himself. Haruspis wrote an article on the Didact. Truth be told, he's actually written several, but the one in question articulates a great way to honour the Didact and his story, and ideally tie up these loose ends, resetting his story for a return to the games in a future title. So with his permission, I'll read a quote from his blog. I think it would be a mistake to frame this as some sort of obligation to 343 that this is how they must make up for those missteps, only to be disappointed that Infinite can't really tell the kind of story that is demanded by the Didact. Something also worth noting is the fact that the Didact doesn't really have any relevance to Halo Infinite's setting, Installation 07. This unique Halo was explored in Halo Primordium, the Forerunner Saga's second book, and the Didact is almost entirely absent. He's only peripherally relevant, appearing in some selected flashbacks to the human Forerunner War. With Installation 07, there are a lot of other mysteries to explore, and I can't help but think that it might be better for the game to accentuate that history by not having its Forerunner element personified by a specific character. A number of people consider the expanded universe to be story gel for characters and storylines that don't necessarily work out in games. That is an earned cynicism in some respects, but I'm not entirely convinced by it. One of the fundamental issues Halo 5 had was that it had to juggle over a dozen major characters. It didn't have time to do very much with any of them. Ensemble studios in the Halo games very rarely work well, and I think it's in 343's interest to really scale that down. That means coming to terms with the idea that certain characters we're invested in might not have room to appear in Halo Infinite. As such, let's not think of having their stories continued in the expanded universe as some sort of apathetic relegation. Despite some mismanagement here and there, I highly doubt anyone at 343 actually says, whatever, we'll just throw that in the books. When our hopes and wants for certain characters and stories gets too specific, too granular, we will only be let down. Consider instead the bigger picture. The expanded universe provides a platform to tell the stories of these characters where they can get the kind of substantial focus the games can't always deliver. Halo Renegades is definitive proof of how well that can work. That, I think, is the kind of treatment the Didact needs. As far as his future is concerned, well, some ideas that could be picked up on have certainly existed, at least conceptually, since Halo 4. One thing is for certain, as the Ur-Didact admits in a conversation with the librarian that he has communicated in some fashion through the domain with the Forerunners in the future. Quote, I wandered through all the corridors, so they appeared anyway. Centuries of wandering through the hallways and caverns and even deeper, darker places, lined and fitfully aglow with ancestral records and memories, upwellings of past visits, rarely by me, sometimes by our ancestors, on occasion, our descendants. Descendants, I asked? The domain keeps its secrets only with difficulty. It wants, it needs to spread knowledge. It wants to tell us when we're being foolish, but it can only replay the memories and emotions of those who came before. Still, rarely, it violates its own rules. What about our descendants? I persist. I felt their touch, their love, and yet they were fading. The domain is filled with sadness. A deep shadow has fallen over everything Forerunner. End quote. The domain violated its own rules, as it is sometimes known to do, to show the Ur-Didact the future. It showed him that in some way the Forerunners do go on and survive. In Halo Renegades, when Spark finally meets with the librarian's imprint on Earth, they briefly discuss the Didact, and I quote, "Can the Didact find peace? The sorrow that flashes through our eyes instantly pains me. I fear my husband is beyond redemption." End quote. And Bastion, quote, "This imprint will join the others already gone to the absolute record. Humanity must be given the tools to hold the mantle of responsibility, and the knowledge, they must have the knowledge to tend the domain." She stares off into nothing for some time before gracing me with a soft look. "Then perhaps Bastion?" I ask. Her tender smile fills me with love and finality, and I see that she does not believe she will ever make it there, or perhaps anywhere she might recover and rest and find peace at last. "Perhaps," she answers, "with a little luck." The nature of these things is no clearer, not yet, but the pathways are open. In time, they may converge to become whole again. Until then, Silentium. Thanks for watching. Stick your comments down below. I look forward to what you have to say. Again, be sure to take a look at Haruspis' blog and follow him on Twitter, and check his narrative video over on his channel too. I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons, so Tenchi the Silent Cartographer, Brian Sebastian, Red Sea, Darian and Neek the Holders of the Mantle, Ty, Black Biscuit, J Rabbit, Austin, Kaiser, Sarlex, Reclaimer 216, The Revanche, Wolf Slim and Andre my Reclaimers, Zach, Deep Cover, Verbal Statue, Specico, Spartan A498, Guppy, Josh, Mickey, Bastion, Molchar, Slithery Tube Dude, Nightride, Sierra G059 and Alfarius, my Metarchs, and all the other patrons that have jumped aboard to support the channel. You guys are awesome, and all of this wouldn't be possible without you. If you like Halo lore discussed to insaneness of detail, hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves. Be sure to support us on all major social media channels, including Discord, and if you really love the channel, consider heading over to Patreon and supporting the channel over there. It would mean the world to me and would free up more of my time for me to put into this content and other Halo-related goodness. Take it easy, everyone, and find peace in the domain.